later in the program. This economic summit is very timely. For decades, Caribbean countries have flirted with integration. The West Indies Federation, founded in 1962, and successive regional agreements have met with lukewarm responses. In fact, former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, in the latest report on the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, the CSME, says, although it is a workable objective, member states are half-hearted and are not as committed to the CSME ideal as they should be. He called for significant commitment on behalf of member countries. But many voices here in Jamaica and in other Caribbean countries are questioning whether integration can work, and some suggest that we should go it alone. Well, we are here to talk about that and to discuss the role that regional economic integration can play in national growth and development. We have an excellent panel. We have excellent speakers and thinkers to explore the topic. And we are also grateful for your vote of confidence because although Champs is going on at the National Stadium, you've chosen to join us here to discuss this important topic. Our program has two parts. This is part one, and part two will take the form of a panel discussion with moderator Emily Shields of Radio Jamaica. Portions of the program will be broadcast live on Power 106, and I invite you to look at the back of your program, and for those who may be listening by radio, you may contact us on WhatsApp at 876-340-9413, on Facebook, and on Twitter, at UTech Jamaica and www.utechjamaica.edu.jm. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as we welcome Professor Paul Golding, the Dean of the College of Business and Management, to officially welcome you to this summit.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. For the last 15 years, the College of Business and Management, we have been having 2 weeks of excellence. Over the last 5 years, we have included in this week of excellence an item in which we look at a public value approach in addressing either a grand local issue or a grand regional issue. In the past, we have looked at corruption and its effect on development. We have looked at leveraging culture, tourism for growth, culture and tourism for growth and development. And this year, we're looking at CARICOM. A line in our national anthem says, "Give us vision, lest we perish." And when you look at the Caribbean and you look at us individually, we are very small players in a large and dynamic global economy. What is happening since World War II is that the approach has been towards one, liberalism, and two, globalization. Globalization has not been uniform, although it has contributed to a high level of growth and wealth. And what you have had as a result of this skewed development is that there has been some backlash. We have seen America first. We have seen the beginning of what is likely to be trade wars. We have seen the beginning of a trend that we thought had left us from the 1940s called economic nationalism, and it goes by several other names. We have also seen Brexit, and we have seen some of the irony of Brexit, in which the UK has had to go back to the EU because they feel that they have been threatened by Russia. So nationalism is not an approach in which you can really think of going it alone. You have these other issues because the issue is not just about economic nationalism. When you look at CARICOM, CARICOM has maybe about 18 million people. And when you put Guatemala and Honduras together, there are 24 million people. I don't need to elaborate on that. I've seen incidents in which we were pirating movies in Jamaica, and the host country was supposed to come to prosecute. And when they look at the size of Jamaica, to say, listen, this is the size of the market, they thought that it was not worth coming for it. I think it is a very opportune time for us as the Caribbean region to look at how are we going to move forward in an economy that seems as if it is taking no prisoners. A world economy in which it seems as if it's taking no prisoners. It is relentless, it is innovative, and whether it is economic nationalism or globalization, we are just talking about ideological differences here. We still have to look at how we as a region is going to survive in this hyper-competitive world market. And if you ask my opinion on it, we can't do it alone. 2.5 million people or 2.7 million people. It's not such a big economy. 18 million people is not even such a big economy when you look at CARICOM as a whole. So when you look at small islands with 100,000 people, you ask yourself, well, what should we do? But I'm not the main speaker this evening. All I'm doing is setting the table. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to this summit. All I was trying to do just now is to create some kind of a context. I'd like to welcome Ambassador Vasilevska. And I had a quick discussion with her before to make sure that I was getting that pronunciation right. Mr. Joseph Cox, Dr. Andre Gordon, and our own Myrtle Ware to this economic summit. Ladies and gentlemen, we're happy to have you this afternoon, and we trust that this will be, in fact, we don't trust, we know that this will be a very engaging discussion about where should we go as a region, or are we going to continue to, as Jamaicans would say, play boaty. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our economic summit. I look forward to hearing from the panelists and from our guest speakers. Welcome.
Thank you, Professor Golding. I'd like to remind you that I'm sure most of you are aware of this, that the University of Technology, Jamaica, UTech, is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year under the theme, Pioneering Past, Bright Future, 1958 to 2018. One of the most influential thinkers in economics, Adam Smith, said that little else is required to carry a state to its highest degree of opulence, from the lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. And so say all of us, especially I think, the bit about easy taxes. One person who I'm sure will be able to amplify these words is our guest speaker. Ambassador Wasilewska will address us on best practices in regionalism, the case of the European Union. Of course, we're keen to hear what she has to say, especially given recent developments in Europe, such as Brexit, the separatist movement in Spain, and the heated debates about immigration across the continent, among other issues. We now invite Mrs. Patricia Thompson-Taff, a graduate student from the School of Advanced Management, to introduce Ambassador Wasilewska.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to be here this evening to introduce our keynote speaker. Magazata Wasilewska took up her post as ambassador, head of delegation at the delegation of the European Union to Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos Islands, and the Caribbean Islands on September 1st, 2016. Previously, she was head of division for conflict prevention, peace building, and mediation at the Security Policy Directorate of the European External Action Service in Brussels. In this capacity, she led a team responsible for focusing EU's work on conflict prevention and peace building, providing mediation support to EURs and peace building, running the EU's early warning system for violent conflict, and developing a new framework for EU support to security sector reform. In this role, our team has provided support to EU delegation in Syria, Colombia, Mali, South Sudan, Nigeria, Central Africa Republic, Great Lakes, just to name a few. Previously, she was head of division for elections and democratic support in EEAS, and prior to that, at the Directorate General for External Relations of the European Commission. She has managed electoral observation missions of the EU in Peru, Zambia, Southern Sudan, Uganda, Honduras, Bolivia, Solomon Islands, again, just to name a few. Before joining the European Union, Ms. Wasilewska worked as a senior specialist on issues of organizational governance and strategic planning at the Amnesty International of Safer World, both at the national and global level. Our main areas of specializations were organizational transition and growth, human rights, conflict-sensitive development, post-conflict democracy building, and non-proliferation of small arms and light weapons. We are pleased to have her in our midst this evening as our keynote speaker. Let us all welcome Ambassador Wasilewska.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Professor Paul Golding, Dean of the College of Business and Management, Mr. Joseph Cox, Assistant Secretary General, Directorate of Trade and Economic Integration, CARICOM, Dr. Andrea Gordon, Managing Director, Technological Solutions Limited, Mrs. Myrtle Allison Weir, Lecturer, Human Resource Management, UTech, Mrs. Emily Shields, Moderator, Mr. Patrick Harley, Master of Ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here today. It's amazing how my Polish name never fails to bring a challenge and a smile on people's faces. I've been in this country for a year and a half, and I have to say I'm impressed how the pronunciation is improving. Probably by the time I leave, people will be able to say a short greeting at the beginning of every speech. As I said, I come from Poland, a country that has undergone tremendous transition in its modern history. And I was born under deep communism when transition, a political transition, end of communism, never mind membership to the European Union, were not even on our radar. They were not even part of our wildest dreams. And here we are today, one of the biggest member states of the European Union and economically extremely strong due to the membership of the European Union. So it's a particular honor for me to be invited to speak to you today on the issue of regional integration. And I have to say that in a year and a half that I've been here, I am amazed at a lack of faith in deeper integration that is needed in this region. As Professor said, 18 million is more than 2.5 or 2.7, and definitely more than 100,000. But it's still not the largest economy in the world. I am fascinated by processes of transformation, partly because I experienced this in my own country and in my own region, but partly because I think they are energizing, cleansing and energizing, and they force people to stop and reflect on things that work and things that don't work, be hopeful for the future, bold and daring. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come to Jamaica. So it's a particular honor for me to be here for all those reasons with you today for this annual economic forum. And I'd like to begin by thanking University of Technology for organizing this important event and for the opportunity for the European Union to give the keynote address. I'm pleased to try and share my views on this topic, in particular because supporting greater integration of Caribbean countries into the world economy is one of the key priorities of European Union's development policy. I should add European Union and its still 28 member states. As you know, regional integration is a process that has the potential to facilitate stabilization of peace and prevention of conflict, economic development, but also the delivery of regional public goods and the management of regional response to global challenges. Together, you're always stronger than alone. Let me start with regional integration from a European perspective, or European perspectives. The theme of the Economic Forum reflects the importance of regional integration in tackling the multiple socio-economic development challenges facing the world today. Over the past 5 decades, we have been witnessing all around the world a growing number of regional integration initiatives and arrangements, mostly driven by political, security, trade, and economic considerations. Among these initiatives is the European Union, which is widely regarded as the most advanced regional integration process, or as we sometimes like to say, the most successful peace project in the world. The advent of European Union in the 50s was the result of a vision of peace and democracy emanating from Europe's founding fathers. 60 years later, the European Union has emerged as an inspiration of hope, allowing the people from Europe to consolidate democracy and share a common future. But it's not only a source of hope for the people of Europe, it's also a leading example and a source of hope for people around the world. I have experienced this personally, coming from Poland, a former communist country, or in fact even before it became communist country, a country that suffered the most during the Second World War. My country was practically flattened. But a country which joined the European Union nearly 14 years ago. I can vividly recall that after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the main goal of the vast majority of my fellow citizens was to join the European Union, actually to join the NATO first. but then to join the European Union and to be able to also benefit from the political and economic freedoms offered by the Union. As you can imagine, coming out of communism, security was very high on people's agenda. Since joining the European Union, the value of Poland's GDP has more than doubled from $217 billion in 2003 to an estimated $526 billion in 2017. We did the statistics in dollars because I think you're more used to thinking in US dollars than euro. By any measure, this is a very good performance for a new member state. You see, once Poland entered the EU, new market opportunities arose for Polish exporters. Within 10 years after the accession, the value of exported goods from Poland grew by 178%, from $74 billion in 2003 to $206 billion in 2014. This level of growth is not only true for Poland, but for other new member states that joined the European Union in 2004. These figures should illustrate the tangible economic impact of regionalization in the European context. But apart from the statistics and the economic indicators, the free movement of people meant that the generation of my 25-year-old son embraces Europe in a way that I never thought was going to be possible. Not only they study and work and travel and move freely, but they really feel citizens of the 28 member states. The passport, of course, is your personal identity, but they feel equally comfortable in France, Portugal, Spain, Romania, I'm looking at the countries that my colleagues represent here, as they do in Poland. And that goes for all citizens, young citizens of Europe. When Spain started its economic crisis, a lot of young people came looking for jobs in Poland, whereas before it was the other way around. When we first joined, the young people of Romania and Poland were flocking towards UK, France, and Italy and Spain looking for jobs. That has changed around. So the regionalization also allows, especially the young generation, to embrace the diversity of languages, of cultures, of markets, of academia in a way that is not possible if integration is not there. The European Union and Jamaica and the wider Caribbean share deep-rooted and historical bonds based on strong social, cultural, and economic ties, as well as common values and interests. And it is very important for Jamaica and other English-speaking Caribbean not to think of UK as your only door to Europe. There are other 27 member states, and the relationships with the other 27 have to be nurtured and developed. In the same way, Europe has had its challenges. I know that the Caribbean is experiencing its own set of challenges too. Looking on from outside, it seems that the road towards regional integration has been a bumpy one for the Caribbean. From efforts at federation in the 1950s to the Caribbean Free Trade Association to CARICOM and the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, the relevance of regionalization efforts has been questioned continuously. At the same time, I know that governments over the years have continued to reiterate their commitment to regionalism as a core principle of their foreign policy and development strategy. Now, regional integration in the Caribbean context. The Caribbean region comprises countries with a high degree of heterogeneity, I always have a problem with that word, in terms of size, development, status, history and culture, but they are facing some fundamental common challenges: crime, citizen insecurity, violence against women and children, and climate change, just to name a few. The change in global environment, coupled with the geographical characteristics and other unique specificities of the Caribbean as small island and developing states, make the need for regionalization most urgent and relevant. But while there has been significant progress in the Caribbean integration over the past 40 years, some critical constraints still need to be addressed in order to advance the regional agenda. I note efforts by Jamaica to strengthen its position within the regional integration process with the establishment of the CARICOM Review Commission chaired by Mr. Bruce Golding, former Prime Minister, and subsequent tabling of the report. The 33 recommendations of the report, I'm sure have been already studied very carefully by all the member states, and I'm sure will be soon hot topic of the regional discussions. But many say that the report, for the first time, boldly states what many have been thinking for a long time. The report is very forthright in describing its findings and recommendations and puts a lot on the public agenda for discussion. Issues such as political will and enforcement mechanisms are flagged in this very important document, which provides useful information for charting the course forward. The report notes that there is, to varying degrees, a deficit in political will on the part of Caribbean states to move towards deepening their regional integration. This is the central theme of the executive summary and the first of the recommendations. Recognizing that regional integration is the only way forward, it proposes that a last chance be given to the member states to demonstrate concretely their commitment to the CARICOM single market and economy within 5 years, failing which Jamaica should withdraw from the economic partnership while seeking to remain a member of CARICOM. That's a very bold recommendation, and I'm assured by the administration that that would only be absolutely the last resort, and that there is no intention as for today to leave the CARICOM. Nevertheless, it's a very bold call that serious conversations need to take place. From the institutional perspective, the report notes that the Caribbean states have endowed their main organization, the CARICOM Secretariat, with no effective means to enforce the adherence by the member states to the rules and commitments they have signed up to. It recognizes the potential of the regional bodies and puts down many recommendations to make Caribbean member states accountable and sanctionable to their peers in the pursuit of integration. This report provides a pivotal moment for meaningful dialogue and concrete action to advance the process of Caribbean regional integration, which we are all agreed has been slow. Now, looking at the unwieldy structures of European Union, there are plenty of imperfections in how the European Commission and the Council and the EEAS, the new diplomatic service, are set up. And no one says it's perfect. Nevertheless, there are constant discussions and efforts, and the Lisbon Treaty is the most recent attempt to reform the cumbersome structures. But cumbersome as they are, they do bring added value, and everybody complains about the bureaucracy of the European system, but it does seem to deliver. So I very much hope that the report will be taken on board for discussions at the regional level. As you know, European Union encourages deeper integration, so I'm not going to say whether we agree or disagree with the recommendations, but there's plenty substance there for very rich discussions. Now, what are the tools to promote Caribbean regional integration on our part? So, guided by our own experience acquired over the past 50 years, the European Union has been a long-standing supporter of regional integration throughout the world, including in the Caribbean region. Cognizant of the challenges faced by the Caribbean, the EU has been promoting and supporting regional integration in the region through a range of tools such as financial cooperation. Unfortunately, everybody always thinks of EU mainly as a source of money, but the financial cooperation does make certain conversations and reforms possible. So it is the most traditional form of intervention. There are various financial instruments to channel the European Union's assistance towards regional integration, yet one of the most important is the European Development Fund. For the period of 2008 to 2020, European Union allocated almost €500 million towards regional integration and regional response to common challenges such as climate change, crime, and security. This is what we call a regional envelope, and it's managed from our delegation in Barbados. There are 3 main pillars there, and integration is number 1. And all it requires is a cooperation between at least 2 countries in the region, preferably more, but at least 2. So this support is the true reflection of the European Union's commitment to assist the various integration processes in which CARIFORUM countries are involved. And as you heard in the introduction, I cover 5 countries in the region, or actually 3 countries and 2 overseas territories of UK. And even in the short experience, I am amazed how often it seems that each country is reinventing the wheel when looking at challenges that are common to the region, rather than trying to find best ways of learning from others, cooperating, transferring knowledge, and finding common solutions. So the second tool, trade policy. This is another instrument to promote greater regional integration within the Caribbean region. The Economic Partnership Agreement was signed in October 2008 between European Union and CARIFORUM countries, and it does not only open the European markets to goods and services from the Caribbean, which can boost the economy of the region, but it also provides a platform for greater intra-Caribbean trade. In fact, the EPA promotes increased harmonization, cooperation, and coordination among Caribbean countries, with a view to creating greater market access opportunities. And until today, I'm assured by my colleagues, it is still the most comprehensive economic partnership agreement that the European Union has with any partners. Admittedly, the EPA has yet to fulfill its potential, and on both sides, the CARIFORUM and European Union, and we agree more needs to be done to remove the constraint to accessing the benefits that are available to business. The EU is Caribbean region's 2nd largest trading partner after the US. In 2016, with some €2.7 billion of export to Europe, the Caribbean countries still run a trade deficit. In other words, they export less in goods and services to Europe than they import from Europe. Therefore, the EPA is an opportunity for people and businesses from the 2 regions to invest in and trade with each other, and thus to help Caribbean countries grow their economies and create jobs. The third tool is a political dialogue. European Union has always shown strong solidarity during trying times, and we remain a committed partner to the Caribbean, willing and ready to share our experience of regionalization and integration. Continuing political dialogue can further work towards deepening regional integration, although the dialogue on regional integration, accompanied by lessons learned from EU experience and diversification of stakeholders, has somewhat strengthened, more has to be done in order to further develop the EU-Caribbean dialogue. Now, what are the lessons learned? Despite the Brexit, which hasn't happened yet, but it's upon us very soon, March next year, and other challenges facing the European integration process, the EU still has valuable lessons to share with other regions for deepening regional integration. Teamwork. All Caribbean, not just policymakers, decision makers, and regional economic communities, have a role to play in making regional integration a reality for all the citizens. The civil society plays an important role also, and many calls for proposals funded from the Commission's budget target non-state actors such as universities, NGOs, chambers of commerce, and international institutions such as the UN to deepen regional integration. In one of the conversations just before entering the lecture theatre, we were reflecting that the integration will not happen in this region unless the leaders, the political leaders, are not convinced about it. But the leaders will not be convinced about it if there isn't enough faith in integration amongst the citizens. Another lesson learned, tangible impact. The fact is that regional integration, wherever it takes place, is never an easy road because it has far-reaching implications for the people who are at the center of development. As such, it must demonstrate tangible impact on the daily lives of the citizens of the region and requires their buy-in. In other words, the main challenge is to bring regional integration much closer to the people. Most of the time, people are more scared of what they're going to lose, and it's harder for them to believe what they can gain. The next lesson learned is ownership. Above all, the strengthening of national-regional linkages is essential to deliver on the regional agenda. The advancement on the regional integration process requires strong ownership and harmonization through involvement of wide spectrum of national and regional stakeholders. But action at the national level plays a crucial role for regional integration to deliver its full potential. Effective national governance structures are essential, for instance, to ensure the implementation of the commitments taken at regional level on market integration. But people, citizens, have to really be convinced what are the benefits to everyday lives from working closer together. I still remember the debates in my country before the referendum for the membership of the European Union, the fear of giving up national identity, the mistrust that suddenly it's not the capital and not the government, not the people of Poland that are going to be deciding about our future, but some strange body in Brussels. And some of that suspicion and lack of trust is still there. But despite the divisions in my country today, I think it's hard to find a citizen in the street who would say his or her life is worse today than it was before we entered the European Union. So the future of the EU-Caribbean relations. Today's forum and the topic being interrogated is quite timely, as Jamaica and the Caribbean and the EU are preparing to negotiate a new framework for their relationship post-Cotonou, which expires in February 2020. The negotiations on the new agreement will start in the summer of this year, and Jamaica is already playing quite a crucial leadership role in that process, presiding over the ACP grouping. In this regard, the EU intends to preserve key components of the Cotonou Agreement whilst deepening the partnership at the regional level. After many years, a high-ranked Commission's official visited Jamaica for the first time in February of this year and met with the Jamaican government, private sector, and civil society. He even visited Denham Town. He invited all of the interlocutors to look at and reflect on the specificities of the Caribbean region and to factor them into negotiations on the new post-Cotonou agreement. His actual words were, you, the region, not just you, Jamaica, but the region, you have to know what you want out of this new partnership. We are looking forward to fruitful engagement and working together with the Caribbean region to arrive at a modern partnership that focuses on our common interests and goals. In conclusion, the EU firmly believes that regional integration is essential for the economic growth and prosperity of the Caribbean. In today's globalized world, regional integration through regional cooperation is seen as a vital pathway towards sustainable economic growth, closing development gaps between and within countries. Therefore, regional integration offers greater opportunities to enhance economic growth and competitiveness, and hence the attainment of national development goals and for the advancement of this region as a whole. There is an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This sums up the new approach that the EU is taking to sustainable development at both the European and global levels. I consider it most apt for this situation, for we recognize that today's challenges cannot be resolved by any one person, country, or continent, but rather collectively. It is no secret that in reaching Paris Agreement, this region and all the countries of the Caribbean were the main partner for European Union in achieving the common goal, the Paris Agreement. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion and hearing the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Vasilevska, for a very thoughtful presentation. You gave us much to chew on. We note your very strong vote, the passion you expressed for regional integration, and we thank you for the pointers, the lessons that we may take from Europe in this regard. It's now time for us to move into second gear, or is it third? The panel presentation portion of the Economic Summit. And we invite Emily Shields to join us to lead this portion.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Students from UTech, let me see your hands. Good to see you so well represented, including the gentlemen over there in their flip-flops. Happy to have you in whatever form. And welcome to all of you who are just visiting, having heard the interview on the hotline today. I see all of you, thank you very much. All of you visitors who have just heard about this very crucial discussion, this summit, and wanted to be here, let me see your hands, visitors. Thank you and welcome. It's the College of Business and Management 15th Annual Celebration of Excellence. It's an economic summit. And I think the groundwork has been beautifully laid for what is, as my colleague Mr. Hartley has said, a very timely panel discussion on this crucial matter. It comes immediately behind, as you heard, the tabling of the CARICOM Review Commission by Mr. Golding, and it comes at a time when many of us, and I'm sure the students of UTech, are watching with great interest. How is it that the UK is going to negotiate this awful divorce when they never planned for a divorce with the marriage and the European Union? But help me welcome to talk about encouraging regional economic integration for national growth and development. I have an applied economics consultant, an advocate for over 25 years, who assumed duties as Assistant Secretary General, Trade and Economic Integration at CARICOM Secretariat. He's a Jamaican, and he did that September 2015. Mr. Joseph Cox. A round of applause for him, please. Please help us welcome again Managing Director of Technological Solutions Limited, TSL, which is a company providing technical services to the manufacturing, distribution, food service, hospitality, and export sectors, and Chief Executive Officer, Principal Consultant of TSL Technical Services Limited, a consultant company, Dr. Andre Gordon. We have Human Resource Management and Development Consultant and Trainer. Mrs. Myrtle Ware is a lecturer of Human Resources Management here at the School of Business Administration, and she is also, or she served as Program Director for the Human Resources Administrative and Information Systems Management program here at UTech, also a business consultant and has been so for over 15 years, Mrs. Myrtle Ware. And with the backdrop, the brilliant perspective from Poland and the European Union, another round of applause for our keynote speaker, Ambassador Wasilewska. I shall make way firstly for the presentation by Mr. Joseph Cox. Just before he comes, please put your cell phones on silent. The brochures that you have, there's a section for notes at the back. Take copious notes, and we will have very interactive session when the panelists are through with their presentations. Here's Mr. Joseph Cox.
I'm wondering if I should do the PowerPoint at all. I just speak. We can bring it up. You know, as I listened to the presentation by the goodly ambassador, I wondered if I should have run through the door. Because now I am forced to get into some heartfelt truths. But let me start by recognizing Dr. Paul Golding, Dean of the College of Business and Management, Her Excellency Ambassador Wasilewska, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to Jamaica, among others, Dr. Andre Gordon, Mrs. Myrtle Ware, Emily Shields, who is not only an attorney at law, but I call her my Twitter-in-chief, since she keeps me connected in Ghana with what happens in Jamaica. Keeps us quite entertained. Of course, my friend Patrick Hartley, for how many years. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all good evening. No. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Right. You see, some of us travel many hours to get here, so we want a little bit more life in the process. Now, you know, one of the things as we look at this topic, and I really had a PowerPoint presentation, but I suspect that it will be shared, so we don't really have to be detained too much by that. So I'll just really go through a couple of points here, because as we look at this process, one of the realities we have to recognize is that individually we go fast, but together we go far. And the truth of it is those are the fundamental guiding principles which govern the process of regional integration within CARICOM. The success of this process rests exclusively on the emergence of a positive psychology and positive expectations by households, workers, and firms within the region. Economic agents must be convinced that the program of regional integration is credible for them to extend their rational expectations beyond the short term and imagine a rise in their permanent wealth and income. In essence, while our development paradigm assigns primacy to agency, meaning that people's ability to act on behalf of what matters to them, it is mindful of the fact that what matters to people may well be the product of bounded imagination or resigned preferences. That is, to the extent that people's preferences are shaped, at least partially, by their circumstances and experiences, limited exposure to alternatives may lead people to think that their current preferences are the only ones imaginable. They believe that certain outcome sets are not achievable. In the largest sense, the reason why CARICOM finds it hard to overcome its multiple challenges is that bitter disputes divide not just national governments, but the societies of each member state, but yet we persevere. The institution of CARICOM continues to be buffeted by regional tensions and sovereign-minded member states that are constantly in the process of deciding to what degree they should forge a new union or maintain their separate ways. All is not lost, however, as the process of integration requires patient capital, and our process of integration is still young. It has taken the European Union just over 60 years, starting with the Treaty of Rome, and the United States over 200 years to reach their current state of integration. Europe is still having challenges, what with Brexit, among other issues. And, well, the USA, all right, let's move right along. Indeed, in the region, our model of integration is the most difficult construct of all integration models, where no supranational authority exists, and thereby the process of enforcement is limited. The job of forging a union is never finished, as economic, political, and cultural tensions constantly nibble at the ties that bind. CARICOM is a collective of sovereign nations bound by common economic, social, and political ideals, as articulated in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, where consensus is an imperative, but it is guided by moral suasion. That's why the report of the Commission to review Jamaica's relations within the CARICOM and CARIFORUM frameworks is a relevant report worthy of study and impatient of debate. For our part, we welcome such oversight. Indeed, it is imperative that we remain cognizant of the fact that as human beings, we are used to our lives changing on the order of days, weeks, and months. But societies change on the order of decades. The perennial challenge for us as a region is not to get lost in the cut and thrust of the daily process of convergence and the noisy negotiations over degrees of integration, but to discern the overall trajectory, the themes of which are long-standing and revolutionary. Regional integration is the process of overcoming barriers that divide neighboring countries by common accord and of jointly managing shared resources and assets. Essentially, it's a process by which groups of countries liberalize trade, creating a common market for goods, people, capital, and services. However, for us to advance the agenda of integration, we must be cognizant of the circumstances that currently prevail. The region is buffeted by the high but unproductive investment, low growth conundrum, which is further exacerbated by high debt levels, all of which are anathema to the ideals of economic integration. They tend to further economic distortions, which exacerbate disparities, including investment concentration risk among member states. For example, tourism is the most important industry in the OECS, ranging from 26% of GDP in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to 74% of GDP in Antigua and Barbuda. Constrained by size, diversifying sources of growth and revenue is difficult, which enhances their vulnerability to trade volatility. In order to achieve economic growth and development, it is necessary to efficiently organize the factors as well as the means of production in order to optimize allocation of resources, which will generate the requisite economies of scale. The cornerstone of the CARICOM's regional integration project is thus built upon this philosophy. A critical and necessary supporting framework is therefore elimination of tariffs and barriers to trade, in addition to the free movement of factors, the latter which encapsulates the 5 main pillars of free movement involves a free flow of capital, people, labor, skills, businesses, and services providers across the borders of those CARICOM member states which have opted to participate in the CSME. In order to make the necessary leap forward towards a stable growth path, the RTC, in the 240 articles which establishes the Caribbean community and the CSME, includes provisions for production integration and production sharing, that is, regional value chains. It also mandates the adoption of policy measures to promote MSMEs, as well as support for and protection of disadvantaged countries, regions, and sectors. Other elements to engender a common supportive framework of the integration architecture also includes measures to promote human resource development, fiscal and macroeconomic policy alignment, investment, and legal infrastructure, among others. However, any analysis of the objectives of CARICOM should acknowledge that the scheme is extraordinarily ambitious. While focusing on economic factors, it seeks to attain full employment, not only of labor, but also of other factors of production. However, the downside of such an idealistic construct is that failure to achieve them in the short run provides grist to the naysayers who use that argument to seek to discredit the integration schema. Another key argument in support of regional integration is that it engenders greater and more effective bargaining power, particularly within multilateral fora, as well as in bilateral and plurilateral trade negotiations, given the region's small size. However, the international principle of one country, one vote affords the Caribbean a stronger voice in the determination of global affairs, including within the multilateral trading system, as CARICOM member states together represent 45% of the countries within the wider Latin American and Caribbean region, as well as just under 8% of the composition of the United Nations by mere voting power, and by that I mean 14 votes. This collective power should therefore be wielded more effectively, particularly in the advancement of global policies that can support the advancement of the region's economic growth and development, such as in relation to debt management or reduction, as well as to climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. Whereas it must be acknowledged that the scale of production and domestic market size, particularly in the smaller countries, will create these economies of scale. There is tremendous scope within the collective grasp of member states to surmount these challenges. Happily, I can say that CARICOM has assumed its role as a champion of this necessary process of transformation. We have been focusing on, for example, the development and rollout of a single ICT space in conjunction with our regional partners to enhance the technological footprint throughout the region. Additionally, we have championed the cross-border utilization of agricultural extension officers and value chain development. Indeed, in the area of trade, efforts have included the negotiation of bilateral trade agreements with a number of countries, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, etc. The region, as part of the wider CARIFORUM, has also negotiated the CARIFORUM EU EPA arrangement and is also currently engaged in negotiations towards concluding a post-Brexit arrangement with the United Kingdom. Another area of particular interest that we also cover is energy. Retail electricity prices in the Caribbean are nearly triple the average price in the United States, with reliability being a perennial concern. Regionally, barring Trinidad and Tobago, demand exceeds supply, which leads to routine disruptions of service. The CCS has been, meaning Secretariat, has been particularly proactive in this area, providing technical guidance to member states in adopting solutions to mitigate costs. It's also instructive to note that regionally, only 18% of loan applications are successful, whereas this probably points to some capacity constraints with respect to our entrepreneurial classes. It also underscores the problem of access to finance, which continues to constrain the region's ability to grow. Firms report of collateral requirements that represent up to 180% of loan value. Specifically, I want to get into that, collateral levels in Belize, Barbados, and Jamaica are reportedly 185%, 182%, and 175%, respectively. And the level for the OECS averages 140%. Ghana is the only country in this construct where the collateral requirements are less than 100% of the loan requested. CARICOM, through its Secretariat, is far advanced in the development of our regional credit reporting intervention framework, as well as our regional deposit insurance legislation. These hopefully will treat with some of the transactions cost challenges that hinder lending. Other recent successes also include the approval of the CARICOM Multilateral Air Services Agreement, MASA, which will remove the remaining barriers to the intra-regional trade in transportation services, allowing further development of the single airspace, the creation of opportunities for feeder airlines and carriers, and a potential reduction in the time of cost of regional air travel. Other important long-term outcomes will be the development of a protocol to introduce, among other things, a system for single security checks for intra-regional flights, which involve multi-country stops. This will enable us to collectively broaden and deepen the process of integration while providing additional growth impulses. Now, there have also been a number of notable successes that also involves the result of the regional integration process. And these involve, first and foremost, the establishment of the organs of the community, which you have all seen listed there. Now, it is interesting, I'm just going to highlight one or two, where we are looking at, for example, the Council for Trade and Economic Development, which has a responsibility for the promotion of trade and economic development. And we can also reference the Conference of Heads of Government, which is the supreme organ of the community and determines and provides policy directions for the community. Of critical importance to the regional integration system, however, is the Caribbean Court of Justice, which has original jurisdiction for the interpretation and resolution of matters relating to the treaty and also functions as a final appellate court for a number of member states. 3 of the 4 councils meet regularly, cited in the report. Sometimes at least twice a year, with the quoted in different iterations, sometimes meeting up to 7 times for the year. The COFAP, which is the Finance and Planning meeting Ministerial Council, has remained a bit of a laggard in this construct. However, since a number of the CARICOM heads are actually the ministers of finance, we continue to benefit from their counsel, albeit under a different construct. It's also important, another important outcome of the regional integration process has been the implementation of the Common External Tariff and the related rules of origin regime, which together represent the foundation of a regional trade in goods regime. The creation of the CXC, which is accepted throughout the region as well as internationally by way of negotiation, by way of through the CARICOM construct, is a major achievement for the region in the advancement of its human resource dimension. CARICOM has also successfully implemented a number of regional institutions which are intended to support the integration process, and you have seen them listed there. And I just wanted to highlight, for example, the work of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCRE, which this Center of Excellence will support the island territories, Caribbean island countries and territories in the creation of an enabling environment for sustainable energy investments and markets by mitigating existing barriers. In fact, this is just a further representation of our collective commitment to energy reform, and in particular renewables, as the University of Technology here, as I commend you on your 60th anniversary, has also been a beneficiary by way of the Master of Science program in Energy and Climate Change, which has been established. Now, our regional integration process is occurring in an environment which is constrained by low-level growth, low productivity, and high debt levels. It's also further constrained by various supply-side constraints, which include a number of structural weaknesses and deficiencies, such as limited transportation connectivity, high energy costs, low human resource development, brain drain, weak financial institutions, lax governance processes, etc. Gaps in the integration process arising from the failure to fully implement a number of core regimes also continue to be a hindrance to economic growth. The goal of regional integration, as originally envisaged, rests upon the principle of sovereign states engaged in an intergovernmental consensus-building arrangement towards achieving the common objective of economic growth and development for its people. As such, there is a limited role for supranationalism within the current construct, with a number of important exceptions. The first exception is that some sovereignty has been ceded through the operations of the organs of the community, through which a number of policy decisions governing the collective must be taken. In the case of trade, adjustments to the CET and rules of origin arrangements must be taken by the quoted, and member states are only allowed to unilaterally apply variations to this principle across a limited range of products. Secondly, sovereignty is also ceded in relation to the CCJ's original jurisdiction for the interpretation of matters related to the intra-regional trade. Now, as we continue to go through this process, and I know time is upon us, but other related challenges also have affected our integration efforts, including limitations on free circulation, which arises from the threat of pass-through as well as payment settlement difficulties. In the case of the latter, the need for a regional currency clearance facility remains relevant, and some might argue for a regional common currency. In addition, the slow pace at which the CARICOM's regional integration process is taking place also poses a challenge for economic growth and development. This may be due to the oft-repeated lack of political will to cede sovereignty and to advance our integration, as well as the related implementation deficit, which arises from the very real and human resource constraints being faced by our member states. Now, there are some opportunities that that come to the fore, and those, if fully exploited, will offer a range of benefits. These include improved productivity across all factors of production through the efficient reallocation of resources to economic activities for which they are most suited. A case in point is a large untapped labor force of Haiti, our largest member by virtue of the sheer size of its population, which represents more than 60% of the region's human resources. This will have a positive impact on those sectors which are experiencing labor challenges, most notably agriculture. However, these outcomes would first require a rethink, in some respects, of the free movement of persons regime. Now, let me just skip to the actual conclusion of this exercise, because we can get more in the interactive process. The challenge ahead for the CARICOM construct is the need to organically grow and periodically reinvent itself to be more responsive to the changing dynamic of the new economic and social political realities. No political or economic entity exists in a vacuum, and CARICOM occupies a significant strategic position on the global geopolitical landscape. Greater emphasis must therefore be placed on macroeconomic stabilization and growth. A macro environment of anemic growth, stagnation, and high levels of debt restrict purchasing power in domestic markets, constraining market development. Bottom line is this, ladies and gentlemen, have we achieved enough? Not yet. But relatively speaking, we're really not that far off the mark. The United States, as we said before, took 200 years. It's still not yet complete. Europe is 60 years on and facing some challenges. So could we reasonably expect the CSME to be fully implemented in 11 years? You want the process accelerated? Give us some enforcement authority, but with sanctions. For our part, at the CCS, there is a process of change that is far advanced, and our well-recognized challenges with communications are being addressed. However, ladies and gentlemen, we must not talk ourselves into a frenzy by exaggerating challenges with integration and ignoring accomplishments. My charge to you is very simple this afternoon or this evening. Let your dreams and aspirations be your rod and your staff that will bring you comfort as we traverse the challenges on the path to regional integration. For indeed, as there is a continued appetite for integration, CARICOM will continue to redefine itself and with steadfastness of purpose, continue to navigate the road ahead. So I will leave you with 3 words. Patience, Jamaica, patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Write your questions down. I'm sure you have a lot. Let's ask Mrs. Myrtle Ware to make her 12-minute presentation.
Good evening, audience. Ambassador, I won't attempt to pronounce your name because I don't want to create a diplomatic faux pas or incident. So, Ambassador, fellow panelists, Dean, Mrs. Emily Shield, distinguished audience. Good evening. My presentation today is about the challenges for the University of Technology. So I'm bringing the discussion home and preparing the workforce of the future. And I challenge the previous panelists that we have low human resource development. So I leave that on the table for further discussion as we progress. I put up on the screen several regional efforts of economic integration, and I think they each speak for themselves. I don't have to elaborate on any of them. CCJ, Carifesta, some of you don't even know what it is. UA, we have CXC that I can put on the table. That's the Caribbean Examination Council. And I begin with a brief representation deliberately to set the context of success, as trumpeted previously. So each of those elements represent our efforts at regional integration. The role of UTech in this integration. And as a university, our mission states that we are to stimulate positive change in Caribbean society through the provision of high-quality learning and research opportunities and service to our communities. What does that say about us? That we have already been engaged in a vision when we started on our journey. And we always had a vision of being part of that regional integration as espoused in our mission statement. I deliberately have not put up the vision statement because it is being revised, because it last spoke to our engagement and activities up to the period of 2015 that talked about a positive impact on society. So we have already embraced a vision and a mission of regional integration. So the challenge for us here at the university is not that of content, but of context. Our values, and I deliberately went to core values of what we instill in our graduates here at the university, because values speak to behaviors, behaviors speak to results. If we embrace the values that we espouse, then we have begun the preparation of world-class citizens and citizens to represent our region, as represented by the large majority of students here who can attest to their university life, both in the formal learning atmosphere of the classroom and outside of the classroom. So I just highlight those values, and I'll come back to make reference to them because they are important in relation to the challenges that we face as a university and the challenge that we face in terms of integration. So let me just highlight respect, integrity, excellence, innovation, team spirit, accountability, and service. And I know you can begin to transition and think about where I'm going with the discussion. So we go to some of the issues that have been espoused by Ambassador and Mr. Cox, and I just speak to a few. Because the perception, and no matter how much we may trumpet that we have achieved, the perception of those represented as a population in CARICOM says that we are merely talkers and have a lot of papers, and we don't have the action to realize that integration process. So we're looking at a failed or mere paper regional integration. And that's a challenge that we have to overcome if we are going to engage the human capital of the region, the leaders of the future. Lack of shared policies. And you know, we talk about the Treaty of Chaguaramas that exists. We talk about the establishment of CARICOM. We talk about quoted and all these elaborate policies and acts, etc. But we have to operationalize them, or else they remain somewhere in a book or in an act or somewhere in a discussion group, because we talk about the golden paper and we've been elaborating that it's going to stimulate a lot of discussion. Caribbean people want action. We've had enough discussion, because if you want to engage us in the region, we have to see the benefits that will accrue to us as citizens. where there's a lack of appreciation of our own regional human capital, because the flights are going with our human capital, and they're going north, they're not going east. Because there's a perception that our own regional people may not be good enough. And we here at the university are preparing excellent students, because when they leave here and go north, I don't have to say anymore. And that's not just UTech, that's our educational institutions, because we have excellent representation of our educational systems represented north and included also east for the few who transition east. And those are usually those who are going back home, not those looking for opportunities outside of their home state. So, we have to look, and I'm not going to go through the list since Mrs. Shields has given me 12 minutes, and I hope I am doing well so far. Regional standards and the cost and ease of resettlement becomes an issue. I'm happy to hear that there are efforts to try and alleviate some of this resettlement process. But we have heard that in the CSME, in terms of this regional passport, that has its own stigmas attached to some of the residents who hold those passports. So how do we resettle? And the ease of resettlement. And Ambassador talked about that feeling of regionalism for her 25-year-old son. He's Polish, but he identifies with a region. How many of you, how many of us sit here and proud to say we are Caribbean because we are lining up for the visas to go north and not to travel freely to go east? So the historical perception is part of the heritage of the perceptions that we have and have instilled in our students, because their learning is not just in the classroom, but the conversations through the media and at their social and informal learning gatherings. Because we talk of federation, and Eric Williams says 1 from 10 leaves 0. And that history has lived with us in terms of that historical integration perception. So history is holding us back, and we can't live in the past because the future is ahead of us. And living in the present, the rear view mirror is not there for us to drive looking in the rear view. We have to look ahead at the possibilities that exist. For us as the lecturers and persons who prepare the human capital for tomorrow, the literature that exists, there's a paucity of literature for which we can engage the students in discussion, case studies, even modeling behaviors and systems and structures of the Caribbean region. There is a lack of that information. And if we look at the books that we make reference to, they are not usually the regional literature that we make reference to. So having done a small survey of students and lecturers, etc., what were some of the challenges? And interestingly, our students have very little passion for integrating themselves and transferring their human capital in the region. The region does not present itself as an economic growth opportunity, especially for its own citizens. And if you look at the list, lack of connectivity, region are not seen as a first option, not seen as positioning itself for globalization, not benchmarking and operationalizing itself at a global standard. Fears of discrimination, hindrances to movement, and where the leadership models to be mirrored. Very interesting question, because we have a lot of discussion on CARICOM from a lot of people who have been at the table at CARICOM. So where is the leadership models that have driven and fought for change and implemented the change rather than stimulating discussion only? And as some of them says, The region is just like home, so then I leave home, especially for those of us in Jamaica. So that was just a small sample, because I had a short time to prepare. So, what are our solutions? Because we here at the university are realizing our mission of preparing people for the Caribbean context of the deliverables of this high-value capital that my colleagues have prepared and developed is not being embraced in the region. So let us make it viable and implement the things that we say we want to do. Demonstrate the leadership behaviors that will engage the future leaders of this region. Because most of our leaders in the Caribbean have benefited from regional educational opportunities. But the future leaders may not come from the region if we are not engaging the behaviors that we speak about. More relevant economic models. We can't have the same problem and keep trying to change the solution by using the same instruments. We have to go outside of the box. What does regionalism mean? What opportunities? Change the context of our frame of reference and come up with new economic solutions. Recognize our region, and let's develop new models, because the old ones are no longer relevant in this era of globalization. Dean, you made reference to the models of today, because the changes are fast. So patience may be required, but how long are we going to be patient if we are going to realize and get those students that we have prepared to engage in the region? And the last point on this slide is important. Create and drive national growth and development that is seen and felt by all and not a few. Seen and felt by all, not a few. Because CARICOM represents the people of this region. It don't represent the leaders. The leaders sometimes forget that they represent the people who sent them there. And therefore, we need to ensure that our models engage and embrace the structures of our society, recognizing where the economic stratifications take place in our organization. So, more action and communication. Mr. Cox, he gave us a lot of information. Who knows that these things are out there happening? So all good and well that we can trumpet it, but if the world doesn't know, then how are we going to engage that capital that we are developing here? Utilize the diversity of the regional human capital. The EU did that successfully. And we are not only an English-speaking community, we are a diverse community. CARICOM and the CARIFORUM region represents diversity, high value, and our history is shared by many, while our linkages to the EU are so important because the bowels of many of our countries are linked to those countries that are represented in the EU. Standardization of regional certification is a solution that will enable our transition of our capital, of value-added capital that we have prepared here at the University of Technology. So we are doing our work here. Our challenge is the world of work in the region. Because if there's not a fit, they're not going to try on the shoe. Yes or no, students? If there's not a fit, you're neither going to buy it, look at it. If it don't look attractive, you're not going to go there. So let us reconsider this whole issue of values and attitude. It was kicked out of the window several years ago, and we've seen the effect of the wrong values and attitudes creeping in. Talk about value proposition. We could have another discussion, but I'm not going to go there as I'm on the air. So I'm going to come back to two last slides. Vision. So Ronald Sanders in the Barbados Today, 2017, and I'm going to read it. As far back as 1947, Jamaica's leaders were the fashioners of a Caribbean vision. No one more so than the legendary Norman Manley, who in that year told the Caribbean Congress of Labour, and I quote, "We must satisfy the growing ambition of our people for an area of action large enough for their creative energies. We must create a large enough area, small though it may be, in the face of the colossal who bestride the world today, but a large enough area to give us a voice and pull and power over those international affairs which, in the long run, determine the peace and prosperity and the opportunity for happiness of the people of these lands." 70 years ago, that vision was espoused. How close are we to that reality? So 10 years later, here are we still in discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still discussing what was our vision 70 years ago. And the Golden Report supports many of the points that are needed to reinforce what this implies. So, the end, the CARICOM flag, the Nike swash, and where have I put it up there? Because if we're going to achieve, we're going to and have victory, because the swash is about victory, we're going to have to come together in a new paradigm, change the schema, as was referenced by Mr. Cox. Change the challenge of context that exists for us here at the university. So on behalf of my colleagues who I represent, let us facilitate the removal or reduction of our challenge as educators. We have promised our students that they are ready for the world of work, because education is about creating possibilities. And in educating our students, we create possibilities for them to realize their dreams. So let the region become a choice and not an option that is not considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Myrtle Ware. What a completely different perspective from two speakers back to back. Tell me your name, sir, and tell me if you believe the regional movement is mere paper integration.
I think it's mere paper integration.
What's your name?
My name is Earl Bailey.
Yes, and tell me why you feel so, Mr. Bailey.
Because one of the most important global issues now is urbanization. And CARICOM has nothing in its framework to deal with urbanization. The Caribbean, Latin America, is the second largest urbanizing region in the world. And CARICOM has not responded to the urban phenomena that is grappling the globe. It's an important dimension of development, and we are totally off that radar.
Right. Come back to that in a moment. Make sure you write your questions down. Let me hear from Dr. Andre Gordon to see if perhaps he has a middle ground in this east-west position taken on encouraging regional economic integration for national growth and development. And I'm pleased that there are so many young people here who perhaps form part of the sample of Mrs. Ware, and maybe you can express and expound some more on why you came to the conclusions you came to. Here's Dr. Gordon.
Thank you, Mrs. Shields. Good evening, everybody. It is indeed a pleasure to be here, and having listened to the two previous speakers, I hope my contribution will advance the discussion. Ambassador, Professor Golding, our Master of Ceremonies, other colleagues at the head table, people who have presented, and of course all of you distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I come to this from a little bit different perspective. I'm a scientist and I'm a businessman. And I prepared a presentation which is on PowerPoint, which is already available. So what I'm going to try to do is to discuss the matter using some of the material that will be presented, but from my perspective. Having lived in 2 Caribbean countries and spending most of my time actually now these days in the Caribbean, working with real people on the ground, I would urge you to be comforted that all is not lost. The people of the region have already begun to integrate and are doing many of the things about which our leaders still speak and have not made up their minds. Having said that, what I'm going to do is just give you a feel. I've tried to break down the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas into the various areas because in preparing this, I realized that most people won't read the document and don't really understand what it says. So when we talk about the CARICOM region or the single market and economy, it covers all of this area, all the way from the Bahamas down to Suriname in South America. The CSME, as you all know, was established in 2001. Jamaica was one of the first countries that signed on to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. The second phase of this treaty was to establish the single economy. The first phase was to establish the single market, and the second phase, which was to establish the single economy, should have kicked in 2015. Well, we are now in 2018, so you know that hasn't yet happened. The feature of the single economy, which I think Joseph has mentioned, will bring significant challenges, includes harmonization of fiscal policy, monetary policy, external trade policies, and a range of other policies that is going to challenge our ability to lead. The protocols of the CSME, the Single Market and Economy, each covers a particular area and defines what is expected to come into being from which we are all supposed to benefit. So I'll quickly look at some of these. Protocol 1 looks at the restructuring of the organs of CARICOM. 2, rights of establishment, services and capital. 3, industrial policy. 4, trade. 6, transportation policy. 7, disadvantaged countries. 8, competition policy. And 9, dispute settlement. So they're all set out in a manner that is supposed to allow us to negotiate. These are some of the signatories to the revised treaties. Several of the British territories have signed, and most of the member states. So Jamaica entered the arrangement in 2005, which effectively the protocol took effect in 2006. Jamaica, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Guyana, and Belize were the initial signatories. If you note, there's a difference. None of the small countries acceded in the initial instance. The objective of the single market and economy is to create one large regional economic space spread throughout the region. And this is intended to bridge the gap between member states because of the harmonization that the ambassador mentioned they have accomplished in Europe. It was designed to create an opportunity for capital, labor, goods and services to move freely across the region. It is intended to benefit the people of the region because of this. So the numbers vary between 15 million and 18 million depending on the sources, but we oftentimes forget that we have somewhere around 4 to 6 million expatriate Caribbean nationals, and somewhere between, the numbers again vary, between 10 and 12 million transient visitors that are in the region. So the actual size of the market, and these numbers, some of these I got from a business person who was looking at the region, the actual size of the market is a lot larger than it appears at first look, depending on what it is you're selling and how. If we exclude Haiti, the median income exceeds 4,500 US. It's not large, but it's a lot more significant than it appears. So I was asked to look at opportunities and some of the challenges. You've heard a lot of the challenges, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. But I think it's important to just describe quickly how the elements are. So the first one is free movement of goods and services. Joseph mentioned the common external tariffs. Free circulation of goods, which is an important concept that isn't often spoken about, which means once an item or any good enters the single market in one jurisdiction and is duty paid, there is a regime to have allocation of those duties across states into which that item or those goods then move. So what that allows is the opportunity for one business that is able to strike a good partnership to literally control the region for a particular item or category of items. This is not yet in place, and it's going to be a challenge to implement it, unfortunately. Free movement of capital. Now, there are some challenges to this, but in particular, the unification of the capital markets with a regional stock exchange. But despite this, there is already a lot of movement of capital across the region, which we can talk about when we come to the discussions. Free movement of labor. I think enough has been said about this. But there are some of us who make our living from moving around the region. And exactly, quite a few, many more than you think. Our musicians, our artists, quite a few are constantly on the move and literally make their living mainly from the Caribbean. There are some challenges, as you would have heard in the recent past, particularly with those of our nationals and nationals from other countries that are not amongst the highest skilled or highest educated cadre of the labor force. So this is an area for which there's going to be need for some focus. The Article 45 of the revised treaty deals with two areas of free movement of CARICOM nationals. The free movement of skills and labor and the facilitation of travel. I learned something this afternoon when Joseph mentioned what has happened in the area of travel. My own experience may not exactly mirror that, and I leave tomorrow again, having come back on Saturday. So, oh, it just started. Okay, all right. Well, I will look to see. So, 20 years ago when I went to Trinidad and Tobago, I could get in fairly easily. Now they want to know where I'm staying. They want a name. They want a telephone number of the person I'm going to, which doesn't happen in most other territories. So we have a little bit of work to do. The persons who are able to move throughout the region, the idea is that they can move freely and stay as they wish, but they must be engaged in some legitimate economic activity. And this is one of the areas that I suspect has caused some of the problems. Another protocol too deals with the right of establishment. And you would have observed that there are several pan-Caribbean companies, many of whom maybe you're not aware, that have established in Jamaica and other countries. And this is really under this particular right of establishment throughout the region. The rights may not, how do I put it, be equally applicable in all territories. And this is another one of those areas that work needs to be done in. But suffice it to say, I think Mrs. Weir had indicated several Jamaican companies, Digicel, Sandal, several others, that have spread throughout the entire region post-CSME. Now, I wanted to look at some of the benefits as we go along. Under Protocol 2, Jamaica stands to gain improved market access for service providers, and this is already happening, enhanced export markets and investment opportunities, a diversification of our exports. This is absolutely not happening. As a former president of the JEA, we have not. Our CARICOM exports have actually declined. And hopefully, we were expecting to have some mutual recognition in terms of standards and certification. We have seen that in the area of academics and professional services, but we haven't seen that in many other areas. In fact, I'm going tomorrow to try to help with a trade issue that hopefully won't get to quoted Joe. See if we can solve it otherwise. Protocol 3 deals with industrial policy, and this was expected to enhance the region's capacity to be internationally competitive by opening up the productive space so that we could have pan-national conglomerates producing collectively. This is to some extent underway, and we can discuss it during the discussion segment. Hasn't moved at the rate that we expect it to. This also covers things like intellectual property and increased integration in production and marketing. Protocol 4, trade policy. This is one of the areas that I believe we've had a lot of successes with the common external tariff, and some protections have come down. And in terms of negotiations, in terms of collective negotiations in trade, we've had some successes. I believe the Caribbean remains, if not the main grouping that would have entered into an economic partnership agreement collectively with the European Union. And that confers certain benefits, even if we haven't made it work the way it should have. Agricultural policy. This is an area in which we have signally failed. The notes are there, the objectives are there. Even in our own domestic situation, in almost all of the Caribbean countries, the approach to agriculture is archaic wouldn't be just the best description. When we start not being able to feed ourselves, perhaps we'll see a different approach. The benefits of what is envisaged is significant, though, because of all the countries in the region, including Guyana, which is a fascinating country because of its scale and the possibilities. Jamaicans and Jamaica tend still to be the most advanced in terms of our approach to agriculture, in terms of our approach to industry and what we do and how we do it. So there actually is a tremendous opportunity through partnerships with our sister Caribbean countries to really expand the productive space and collectively find significantly enhanced opportunities on the global market. Transportation policy, again, I heard what, this is on the Protocol 6, what my colleague said. My own experience has not yet mirrored that, but I hope it will change. Trying to travel in the Caribbean is extreme punishment. And you would know that because you had to get up quite early to get here from Guyana. The benefits envisaged, and so I really hope we're able to do it. If we are able to move in the manner that we can move to Miami and move from Miami anywhere, or even move to Europe and move within Europe, a lot of what is envisaged under the CSME would start to become a reality, even without the heads finding the gumption to take the decisions that they need to take. These two policies, free movement of people and enhancement of transportation links, will drive many of the changes that the ambassador mentioned has happened in Europe. It is easy to move in Europe, move throughout Europe, and once you leave one country, once you're a member of the European Union, you are able to move, do what you wish to do, and people move back and forth. This will make an enormous difference to the CSME becoming a reality. We're down the home stretch, so I just wanted to encapsulate a few of the challenges which my colleagues have mentioned. And one is the inability to make decisions, which has been mentioned, and to stick to time frame. The other is the issue of sovereignty. And sovereignty is a real thorny issue, particularly when you consider the small states of the Eastern Caribbean. A country like St. Kitts, I hear people talking about 100,000. St. Kitts is 50,000, and you're stretching it. Antigua is about 76,000. Dominica was 79,000, and that's probably stretching it. Even before the hurricane, the numbers were declining. So there are real issues, and these people have real concerns. We just need to send 100,000 Jamaicans, and we completely change the voting characteristic of our country. And Antigua will tell you something about that, right, Joseph? So I want to move on quickly to the trade practices and policies. Under the CSME, Jamaica, Guyana, and to some extent Suriname really are the only countries that have opened their markets and allowed unfettered access to goods from the other countries. The OACS has a special provision that allows them to retain protection, which is quite interesting. So non-tariff barriers are imposed quite often by Barbados and Trinidad against one another and against all goods coming in. But under the EPAs, they are not allowed to do that with goods coming in from the EU. So it's quite a curious situation. This poses a challenge to free and fair trade within the region, which has to be addressed if we are to have better choices for consumers and greater competitiveness in regional production. I wanted to sort of encapsulate everything with some of the opportunities. The opportunities that exist by expansion and opening up the region is that we will have larger pan-Caribbean firms whose reach and size allows them to become truly competitive. Most of you would not be aware, I'm not sure, that Sagicor, which now is the largest, one of the largest financial institutions, companies across the region, started as what? Life of Barbados, a small company, which, to be honest with you, we wouldn't even have thought about. Yet they own a significant percentage of the financial assets available in the region because they were able to move under the CSME. Larger and more complementary markets make the region more attractive to investors. And I've had discussions in a variety of forums with people who say, look, if you guys didn't have a single market, we wouldn't be coming here. We have no interest in you because we'd have to make different deals with each of you, which is just not viable. And then finally, the ease of movement of capital has spurred a lot of investment. There's a lot of investment going into Guyana at the moment, into their agricultural sector from regional sources, and you've seen the investment in Jamaica from other regional entities, which was required at the time when the financial markets were closed. Were it not for Trinidadian and regional investors, Jamaica would have had a much harder time than it did. So as Joseph had said, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. In terms of tangible opportunities, just 2 examples. These are what Barbados exports in categories that we in Jamaica could supply them and don't. Significant imports in foods, calcium carbonate, pharmaceuticals, and other areas. And this is a snapshot of some of the opportunities in Trinidad that we are not at the moment taking advantage of. So if I summarize, the benefits of the CSME would be increased inflows of new capital, entrepreneurship, and technology from member states by the establishment of new businesses, business acquisitions, mergers, and joint ventures within a legal and within an organized legal framework that everybody is comfortable with. Enhance trade and economic links with third countries through the coordination and external relations provided by the community, which is already happening. Critically, not to be undervalued, is our voice in international fora as individual, small, vulnerable states. Were it not for CARICOM, I am sure most of the countries that was to get our votes or are interested in discussing with us, I'm not looking at you, Ambassador, I just happen to glance in your direction, would rather spend their efforts elsewhere. But, you know, 14 votes plus those others that we can influence makes a big difference. Improve services, and we've seen this with telecommunications across the region and greater opportunities for travel, study, and increased employment. I close by encapsulating some of the recent recommendations that have already been done. And these all come from the Golding Report. You've heard them. Free movement of people, removal of non-tariff barriers, removal of restrictions on right of establishment, removal of restrictions on the provision of services, integrated capital market, which is really important, and harmonization of laws. I quote this because it drives home the problem we've had. The Golding Report says in the executive summary, and I just quote, we cannot say, or it cannot be said that and I'm paraphrasing, the experiment has failed unless it has been tried, and it hasn't. The CSME cannot be expected to work because it has not yet been fully established. And we are in danger of suffering from integration fatigue without having actually integrated. These are damning statements if taken on their own, but put in the context of the time it has taken others to achieve this, maybe we wouldn't be so pessimistic about our future.
Conclusions into the discussions, because I think they're
Yes.
important.
Yes,
Yeah?
yes.
Let me start with a question for you, Dr. Gordon. How compatible are these non-tariff regimes established by Trinidad, Barbados, and others with the actual wording and the spirit of the treaty establishing the CSME? How compatible are they?
I would also like to hear Joseph on this. The reality is that in many of the cases, there are no grounds for the enactment of these non-tariff barriers, because many of the institutions and or regulations don't exist in the member state that is imposing the barrier. Unfortunately, the approach to resolution typically goes the diplomatic route,
Yes.
and so it ends up at courted, which means that what could be resolved, as we will do this weekend, by face-to-face discussions between businesses with the appropriate people, explaining to them that they actually don't have the legal authority to prevent the entry of items, goes the route of diplomatic discussions, and so often we have issues.
So we need to go to CCJ. We need to have CCJ pronounce on these to say that they're incompatible with the treaty. Mr. Cox. You want to hear from me? Yes. Dr. Gordon invited you in.
Hello?
Yes.
Let me say this very gently. Not one country, not one, has ever taken one of these matters to court. They have been encouraged. The CARICOM, you see, let me tell you something. We love to pronounce things dead in this region. No, we love to pronounce things dead in this region. What I heard today was, at the end of hearing the conversation, I want to say amen. Because when I was raised, what you said at the end of a prayer is amen. And it sounds like a prayer for the dead. The only problem is this, that a lot of what the arguments that have been constructed, the fact of life is that we are not using the settlement mechanisms. The mechanisms under the treaty are very clear to treat with a lot of these issues. Why not? Because countries refuse to put them forward. We can't force anybody to do it. You're just absolutely right. There are issues that are broad, trade issues, non-tariff barriers. We have CAFSA. We have CARDI. These are the agencies that actually work, contrary to the easy argument about the thing don't work. They work and work very well for the business community, and I've been doing so for years.
All right, let me take you up on that for a moment, because how many of you know of the Shanique Mary decision? One of the seminal cases coming from the CCJ, which determined and has set in its ruling that each of us as Caribbean nationals, we should have unfettered access to each of the territories. And I believe we would have entry for 6 months, and we need automatic entry. And we need to demonstrate that we wouldn't be a strain on the public purse, and that would be the only drawback to us remaining there.
Public health.
Right.
Yeah.
So the court having worked, though, Mr. Cox, you can tell me in 1 minute, why is it that the member states of CARICOM have not done what they need to do at the borders so that a Jamaican can go to Trinidad and can have the access for 6 months that the court says he or she's supposed to have? We do the same for Suriname and they here. 1 minute.
All right, 1 minute. I can take 10 seconds. Because the fact of life is that what we hear, in most part, are the problems, and we don't hear sometimes the full story. Yes, you have challenges, don't get me wrong.
Yes.
But what we don't hear sometimes the full story of what happens with it. And believe you me, there is more freedom of movement now we love to talk about. Because the fact of life is that the Shanique Myrie case, and also the one with, oh God,
You're getting
Tomlinson,
old.
the Tomlinson matter.
Yes, Maurice
right?
Tomlinson.
It's equally, it guides and it drives the process. And we at the Secretariat, CSME falls under me, and I can assure you that my officers are extremely vigilant with that thing. And that is how I can speak with certainty about what works in this.
So every Jamaican who goes there now to whichever territory, and those coming here, are we saying that they're going to be having the travel-free access to the territories, as the case say that they should?
Well, what has happened is that Shanique Myrie case has transformed a lot of what happens at port of entry. Yes. I mean, I go to virtually every country, and I mentioned Trinidad. I love Trinidad dearly, but it is the only, I'm helping their companies, so I'm sure they will. But it is the only country in the Caribbean, not Suriname, not Barbados, Ghana, the others you go in, as you go, you're a CARICOM citizen, 6 months. So really, we have made a lot of progress. Yes. I would love to see a little bit of pressure brought to bear so that it goes right across.
And we can see you have a lot of pressure to bring there.
But hold on, let me help you with another scenario. I am a Jamaican, but I'm also British. I have dual nationality.
You can't run for parliament here.
Well, I have no interest. Yeah. Here's a challenge now. I am a Jamaican by descent. I have right of entry into Jamaica, but for many years, every time I traveled, the Jamaican Immigration Services would give me every kind of grief to come in here. Where's my return ticket? Yes. Some of them offer to deport me to England. That's nonsense. This is the point of it. We are a work in progress. Let us stop talking down the process. We're not helping ourselves, because individually we cannot do it alone. We just can't do it.
All right.
We need to be practical.
I want to hear from Ambassador. If you have a question, put your hand up. I'm coming to you, and we'll have the panelists answer. Ambassador Wasilewska, I want to find out from you whether in the original dispensation, certainly when Poland was getting into the EU, you spoke of some of the ideas of sovereignty that the Poles fought with on the shores. And you talked as well as to how the GDP grew several times over from what it was when you entered. But did you have any of these non-tariff barriers created by any member states in the EU that would cause problems as it is now causing with Jamaica and some of the other partners in CARICOM?
The only barrier was on free movement of people. There was a concern, particularly from UK, this was not just towards Poland, but some other new member states, that suddenly there'll be a huge wave and UK will be flooded.
Right.
So there were quotas which were increasing. None of what the British government had expected happened. And in fact, after a number of years, well, first of all, the numbers were not as high. Apart from that, highly qualified workforce ended up going there, dentists, architects, and so on and so forth. And so the government was very happy with that. No trade tariffs. There was no problem with that. And in terms of loss of identity, you have to remember that my country is not very ethnically mixed, and a lot of the suspicion and fear which still exists today is about influx of Today is the fear of terrorism, right? So there were mixed things, but it's basically lack of exposure to other cultures, lack of exposure to other nationalities that was creating.
Yes.
It's a big country,
Yes.
40 million people. And
Poland?
yes.
Wow.
And just
Wow.
Poland alone,
Just
fourth
Poland alone.
biggest.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of us as well, Ambassador, those who have the sentiments expressed by Mrs. Ware's students, the sentiments expressed by Mr. Bailey, who has a question in a moment, a lot of those skeptics would take comfort in the threats of the threats at the Union. France just had its election the other day, and there were fears that Marine Le Pen would come in, and perhaps there would be a movement away. Greece, when they had their near crash of their currency there, and also we heard of Brexit. Did we hear of Brexit before we actually had Brexit? And people would take comfort that the apparent or the seeming dismantling of the EU, or even the move away of one partner, when the EU was not envisaged that you would have this. We're saying we don't need to go into CARICOM, because if Europe can fall apart, what happened to little Jamaica?
There's an excellent article in today's Gleaner on Brexit, which argues that UK, you could have expected, would have been much more united in the negotiations, and yet the grouping of 27 member states with diverse political leadership stand stronger and much more united. So the pro-European feelings are definitely stronger today than the anti-European feelings. But it's no secret that the migration is posing a problem, and the world, look at US, your close neighbor, is experiencing a huge wave of populist and nationalistic kind of trend, right? They come and go, as we know in history. But since I have the microphone, and we were in part of the conversations about lack of connectivity and the fact that you moving around the region, you're actually supporting American airlines more than you're supporting Caribbean airlines. That was a massive shock when I arrived here a year and a half ago. How difficult it is to move around the region, how expensive it is to move around the region, and that it does not subsidize Caribbean private sector. Because that made a tremendous difference in Europe. Before we joined European Union, it was hugely expensive for us to go to London, Germany, or anywhere else. Suddenly, it became affordable to students. Today, with the cheap airlines, you can fly sometimes for 15, 20, 30 euros from one end of Europe to another. Compare that to the costs of the flights here, the time it takes you, not to mention movement of goods. So the fact that you can move goods is no good if it's cheaper and faster to get them to Spain than it gets them from Dominican Republic to here. And that pertains to agricultural goods.
Yes.
When I arrived here, again, going to supermarket, the amount of US products that you have, highly processed, overpriced, it is amazing. What about the Caribbean products? Looking for coconut milk for cooking, you can only find it from Thailand, whereas you've got coconuts everywhere.
There's a coconut shop on right next to Terranova, by the way, which is excellent.
So
very good coconut oil.
I'm saying is whatever Mr. Cox is saying that is working.
Yes.
There's not enough evidence on daily basis to see that, I think.
All right, good. Appreciate that. Mr. Bailey?
I think there is when you read the Golden Report, the language is very archaic. Nobody under 40 wants to read that, and it's not going to stimulate them at all. So nobody under 40 has any interest in CARICOM at all in the Caribbean. I think economic integration is failing because of its focus on economic integration. It is ignoring a lot of social variables that are important for integration. They are nowhere on the CARICOM's radar. When you think of CXC is one of our major regional educational elements. It doesn't speak to creating a social product. It speaks to passing an examination. So after CXC, you're not educated, you pass an exam, but it doesn't make you a social product of the Caribbean. So the Caribbean doesn't have a social production machinery at all. And therefore, we cannot integrate economically if there is no base social product to integrate on. And that is missing in the Caribbean.
Before Mrs. Ware answers, I just want to ask you, I mean, the cultures are so common, as Ambassador said in relation to Europe. So why do you think there is absence of social integration with so much commonality undergirding?
Because the cultures are not the same. What we eat, what we wear, what we speak is not the same as our behavior, which is our social product. They are different things. So whereas we may wear the same things, eat the same things, but our behaviors are different. The way we interpret the world is different.
Really?
It is different.
Yeah, all right.
And that's how we separate the social from the cultural.
Yes.
They're not the same.
How many territories have you traveled to, by the way, Mr. Bailey? How many Caribbean?
About 9.
About 9. And you spent more than 2 weeks in each of those 9?
A week, maybe.
A week, maybe. I didn't appreciate that we were so different. I thought we were so, I mean, I go to Antigua, I go to Barbados, and I'm getting the same pigtail, and I'm getting plus same music, which is why Carnival is a big thing here. But did you pick that up? He's touching on something, though, that even though there are commonalities, your students are expressing some of the sentiments.
There are commonalities that we can't ignore. But at the end of the day, the integration of acceptance of differences does not exist out there. And our young people today see the world from a different perspective.
Yes.
Their interest in the world is to go and get ahead. Right, students? You know, when I ask them what they want when they leave here, it's not about this thing of identity, which was of an era of a different generation. They want to get ahead and achieve in terms of monetary and material aspirations. And nothing is wrong with that difference in generations. Yeah. But we have a leadership that has to understand that if we are preparing a region for our young people, because they are us of the older era, and I'm not putting you in there, Emily, who understand the history of our region, and we have integrated through sport and music, etc., having been a sports person and being engaged in traveling and working in the Caribbean. There is a level of integration, but there are vast differences in terms of ideology. I don't want to call it ideology, but that's the word that comes to mind. Already with the Golding Report, we have another leader already beginning to discount the success of the report. Now the young people see this kind of dialogue, and it's the conversations of our culture nowadays that it's the negative things that we promote. Young people really, and I say this easily, they don't have a lot of good history in their 25, 30 years as a region, because we don't promote it. Mr. Cox here said a number of things. They don't know about these things. Where do they find them? Their job is to look and learn, but they're not interested because they don't have a history of appreciation of the Caribbean. Yes, we dance to, we have carnival and we have the stage shows and they do well, etc., etc. But that cannot be enough because we have to translate that into a business that resonates in an economic model.
Got you. Dr. Gordon, do you find that, which country are you working in at the moment?
Well, that's all of them. Ghana, Barbados,
right.
Trinidad, Suriname.
And do you have
Caribbean.
people, do you have Caribbean peoples of different nationality in the various territories that you work who are actually getting ahead, making money, as I hear somebody shout over there, getting ahead in Caribbean territories as they would in North America, in the UK and the European Union?
Even better, actually. Our staff come from multiple countries. From Suriname, we have Surinamese, Trinidadians, Vincentians, Jamaicans, Dominicans that work with my company, right? Different, yeah. But what I have seen is that throughout the Caribbean, the young people actually have more of a commonality of culture across countries than most of us realize. They listen to the same music, they do the same things, and quite frankly, a lot of it is heavily dominated by Jamaican culture. I mean, very heavily dominated. Most people from the Caribbean, when they come here for the first time, they're shocked, they like it. And most people from Jamaica who actually visit and learn, spend time in the other countries, come back with a completely different perspective. So that is why the movement and travel is so important. Without it, you cannot expect people to reach across physical borders and a sea to cooperate when they don't even really know about the people out there.
Got you. Let me come to Prof, then to Mrs. Ware, then to Ambassador. I want a young person from the audience.
No, it's to respond.
All right.
Just to remind that we are looking at different perspectives of the business perspective and the graduate to be and those who may be recent. And also to say that we had a discussion about the numbers that talk about the economic indicators of what are the gains in certain sectors. And that evidence is not readily available. I have recently done a study for CARICOM for sporting services. And just to get economic indicators as to the success of these things, there's no evidence of that. So how do I convince in a learning environment that these are the opportunities? We know they are there, and we can all say that they are there, but where is the evidence? Because I have to do in terms of evidence-based learning if we are going to convince that they are there.
So it's like we have a lot of areas for PhD theses. So what needs to happen? We have to start producing and publishing our own. Let me just hear Ambassador on this point, then I come to Prof. I want to hear from a couple of young people in the audience how you feel about this matter of integrating.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo this need for freedom of movement, because the gentleman has left now, but the diversity that he was saying, the differences in the region, surely cannot be greater than the differences inside Europe. You look at languages alone, you look at history, you look at religion, you look at politics, warfare. I mean, you know, Germany and Poland, next door neighbors, work very well together, very divided before. So the differences are not the core of it, but I think the need to know the other countries in the region. But how are you going to get young people to travel when it's so expensive and so complicated? That's the first thing. But the other thing, again, surprising for me, there's almost every Jamaican that I've spoken to has been to the States on more than one occasion. But hardly anybody has been to the countries that I've even visited in the region here.
Yes. Pass that one to Mr. Cox for me. He wants to address the one of travel. How many of you actually think if you go to Barbados or Trinidad, you go foreign? How many of you think if you go US, you go foreign? Yeah, because you don't feel like... Mr. Cox, how are we going to deal with the travel between the territories?
The travel, that is why I mentioned, the issue of the multilateral air services agreement. It was passed by the heads of government last 2 weeks ago or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. The bottom line in all of this is that it opens your market.
Yes.
It opens your market. So therefore, what you have now is increased competition. That is what is going to drive down your costs. Because yes, it is well recognized, and that's why we spend so much time negotiating with countries. Because sometimes, you know, I'm obviously constrained in what I can say in certain respects, but the reality of life is that there's a lot of irony here. Because we hear in all these pronouncements and everybody identifying the challenges. But sometimes it would be quite useful to look at the historical antecedents of some of these things. Because, for example, some of the conclusions I see in the report, I was reading an article that's dated 6 years ago and I read the same thing. So, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. But no, you're answering the matter of the travel, though. Is it that we need more aircraft?
You need increased competition because, for example, you can find that moving a half an hour journey can run you into an expense that is greater than from here, for example, to Miami.
Yes.
So that is one of the reasons why there is so much emphasis on going after this broadening, liberalizing
Yes.
the air services arrangement to facilitate that competition and drive down the cost. Oh, and the other thing in terms of the goods, part of the challenge with the goods, and we have to be conscious of this. Yes, some of the countries they have populations of 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 people. The plain truth is that, for example, in Jamaica, whereby your farmers or your producers are filling containers, right, to ship, to export elsewhere. In a lot of these countries, they're doing it per pallet because they don't have the volumes. So that's also an implication for cost.
Okay, got you. Prof?
I want to ask a question which is a little tangential to what has been discussed, but still relevant. And I'm asking this of, of Joseph Cox and the ambassador particularly, but it's not restricted. When you look, no, this is something within your wheelhouse too. When you look at crime in the region, there is a disproportionate number of homicides by guns in the region. Whole heap of people are killed by guns in the region. When you look at the list of the highest homicide countries in the world, the region, not just the Caribbean, but the region generally is overrepresented. Is there enough being done by the CARICOM member states in lobbying against illegal guns that flood this regional market? And I'm saying this based on data that, listen, the regional community is flooded with illegal guns, and we are incapable of producing any guns in any quantity, except for maybe one country.
It doesn't matter. 1 minute, Mr. Cox. 1 minute for the answer. What are we doing about this?
Well, for what I know to date, through there's this agency, the CARICOM agency, Impacts, where they have been, that has consumed the agenda of many heads of government meeting, and I know for a fact that there has been a significant lobby effort in that respect. Now, everything is relative, right? So I can't tell you, I couldn't sit here with any certainty and tell you, well, it has led to a reduction of by how many on it. But I do know that aspect of it has it has occupied pride of place in every one of those meetings.
Well, if that is pride of place, Mr. Cox, and we're seeing these results, yes, the results are really not good, particularly when we're talking about 14 member states and we have a common border, or not a common border, we're very close to most of us, the United States, which is the major production house. We should be really getting some more returns. But did you have that problem at all that you can relate to, Ambassador, in the EU?
Rather than comment on EU, where after the accession, actually the main problem was lack of lack of legislation and then lack of implementation on transit routes.
Yes.
So post-Warsaw Pact, my part of Europe was a very easy corridor, but very quickly efforts were made to change that. So it wasn't even, I mean, the shipments would start as legal and then change into illegal and go into war zones and so on and so forth. But there are very effective tools to track the origins of weapons, including the so-called marking and tracing. There are organizations, there is even a comedian in UK who is involved in that. There are civil society organizations and so on and so forth. But what I want to comment on is the challenges here, because the challenges are from ineffective national security. Islands have always problems with, especially small islands, with managing borders. There is, of course, organized crime, and there's absolute lack of cooperation between the countries. It's a common problem. Give me an example of two countries that work closely on that and effectively, and there's cross-learning. So one of the things from our regional envelope, there will be one of the projects that I know of that is being developed at the moment is cross-border cooperation between Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. But it hasn't started yet. It's still being, and a lot more of that is needed. But also, I think political commitment to actually get serious about it, because again, we probably have the best example of cooperation between the countries for police, for security, for border control, exchange of information, and so on and so forth. And we've offered that. But without political commitment, this is not going to happen. So I think it's also about tracking the money, who profits from it.
Right. Let me just hold you on that, and let me get that youngster. We have just a couple minutes before we wrap. Let me hear a lot of the young people. Yes, ma'am. Introduce yourself, please, miss.
Oh, okay. My name is Raquel Nelson. Well, I don't think enough is being done, speaking in terms of gun controls and catching criminals in the community area, because I feel if you heard on the news like 2 weeks back, where in the Retrieve community, a community between Montego Bay and Westmoreland, where there was a bus driver who was shot by criminals, and that was happening for a long time, and it's not like the police didn't know. I'm from that community, and you literally couldn't drive on that road. It's a bad road. There's no asphalt on the road. It's one of those rocky places, and you literally couldn't drive without them stopping you and telling you that they wanted money. And it's not like the police didn't know about the situation. It's not like it didn't happen before. And then that man wasn't the first person to get shot on that road, and we don't have police stations near there. And I remember a time when my cousins, they have a shop, and there was somebody outside beating on the shop with machetes and stones, and we called the police and they didn't come. So speaking about gun control regionally and stuff like that, there are times when you call the police, like in your parish, and they don't come, and you're going to speak about it on a wider area. We're not dealing with it properly. And before that, there were actually the police came. There was a time the police came, and the criminals actually shot up the police jeep, and they left it, and nobody came back. And then this man, he was a bus driver, and can you imagine driving in a bus, and his wife was sitting right beside him, and they shot him in the face. His jaw fell off in his wife's lap.
God, that's awful.
And it wasn't the first time, and there was nothing done about it.
But what I hear is say there's lack of enforcement locally, so we would have a problem also regionally. Mrs. Ware?
I just want to put on the table a consideration for crime. It has now become an economic activity. True. At the end of the day, it has filled a void. We say when puss run out, rat take over. And maybe we have failed in creating enough economic opportunities that it is no longer consideration for the legitimate economic activities, because the gun crimes, the scamming, etc., have filled the void of lack of national economic growth and development. And I just want to put that at the table, on the table, because we need to answer how are we going to address that.
All right, I'm going to hear from Ambassador, and I'm going to have one comment there, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Gordon the conclusions that you had. We could just use that to wrap the session since we're up on the time. Ambassador?
Just in response to the question from the lady up there, I wasn't trying to suggest that control of flow of weapons is going to solve the crime problem in Jamaica. I was responding to a specific question: what can be done in order to stop flow of illegal weapons? And remember, we're talking in the context of regional dynamics. The issue of crime is extremely complicated, and we're not the only diplomatic representation here that's paying attention to it. We've got lots of conversations with the government, and we're trying to figure out how collectively we can support this current administration in the effort that it's making. You know yourself, because you're Jamaican, I'm only here a year and a half, that this is a multi-layered issue. There are many social issues, there are many political issues. We've got a newly appointed Commissioner of Police. We have a lot of faith in his ability to bring change and reform. But one of the things that you touched on that I think is extremely important is community level. I've heard this very often said by politicians, and I've heard it also even from my helper. People in the community know who the newcomers are. People in the community know where the risks are. And you say that there's no faith in the police, but very often communities choose not to tell anybody, not to do anything about it. I've heard stories from both ends. The one that you said, that the community is almost held at ransom by inefficient police. But I've heard also stories that people from one community go and report it to police station in another community because they have more faith in them, and another police station will react. So the community has to want to protect itself and act as well. It will only work when it happens at all levels, because the extent of crime here is so serious, there isn't any one actor that can tackle it effectively. And how Jamaica will deal with it may have a huge impact on the rest of the region. So it is important that Jamaica is supported.
Thank you.
I have two questions, and quickly. It's about trade itself. And I think I can direct that to Mr. Cox. The first one, a decree was made by President and the Emperor of United States about tariff and aluminum and steel. I know it's going to affect Jamaica and possible Guyana. Then I said, I'm going to ask this question. What kind of strategy that the CARICOM, through your office, will take in order to kind of stem Mr. Trump's ambition? That's the first one. The second one is that as a region from about somewhere in the 1980, I think we have some kind of trade protocol between United States and the CARICOM, known as the Caribbean Basin Initiative. I'm wondering if that initiative is still alive. If it is still not alive, I'm asking if we could find a way to revive it so that we can, or something new, so that we can have a very viable trade policy once more. Because what I've noticed is that our trade, our export is declining from 1 year to another year in respect to United States and the Caribbean.
Thank you. So the first question, Mr. Cox. Will the tariff imposed by Mr. Trump affect Jamaica, you think? And the Caribbean?
Well, put it this way. I mean, I don't know. Yes, I am Jamaican. Yes, I know the answer to your question. I don't know if I'm the appropriate person to answer it, to be honest with you.
Right.
But, all right, fine. Yeah. No, it's not that. All right. The bulk of, remember that Jamaica does not produce aluminum or steel. It's alumina, right? That's one. The other part of it is that the bulk of where we export our alumina to and so on, they don't have a lot of linkages with the United States in terms of those products. So where you may have a challenge is in downstream, whereby down the line, if it impacts when they do the manufacturing, right? Because the plain truth of it is within the region, you know why we don't produce aluminum, etc.? But electricity rates are too high. Right, so it's not cost competitive. So that is one of the reasons why, for example, we're doing so much work with renewable energy and trying to reduce costs and doing power sharing across islands, because in some of them they're too small to get the requisite economies of scale for optimal production. So the bottom line is simple. It's not an easy question. It is something that obviously we have under consideration, and I would ask, and I would not ask, I would suggest that these are the issues, because we have a quartet coming up, and we have initiated a consultation with the private sectors throughout the region to seek to get items that we put on the agenda so that we are even more relevant and more targeted in the discussions that we're having. So it's really up to the countries as to what is it they want to do.
All right, thank you. Got you on that, and I think the minister answered that question in the Senate the other day as well. Minister Johnson Smith, yeah? To an extent? All right, let's pick up the extent the next time we meet, because time is upon us. Doc, I'm going to ask you to take 1 minute and give me those conclusions that you were going to present in your slide, because we have to go.
So I won't bother to use the slides. Just to say, and I know we have a lot of students here, that the opportunities in the CARICOM single market and economy are substantial. And somebody is going to take advantage of them. It can be the other Caribbean countries, as has been the case. I gave you a few examples of them. Or it can be all of us together. Most of the other Caribbean countries, even those that are much smaller than us, have a much higher per capita income. So people there actually have a higher standard of living. So many of us who kill ourselves up to go north might find ourselves having a better life were we to explore the opportunities in the rest of the Caribbean.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much. Thank you as well to all of you. Round of applause for Dr. Andre Gordon, Managing Director, Technological Solutions Limited. Thank you as well to Mrs. Myrtle Ware, Human Resource Management, Development Consultant and Trainer. Joseph Cox, Economics Consultant and Advocate for 25 years. Thank you to Ambassador Wasilewska. Thank you, from Poland. Thank you as well to Professor Golding, Paul Golding, Dean and Professor here at the College of Business Management, University of Technology. Round of applause for him. Thank you, you've been great audience. Thank you to those listening on radio. And I hand over now to my colleague, Mr. Patrick Hartley, and I'll talk with you all tomorrow on the hotline.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. This was really an outstanding discussion, and we thank everyone involved. I know you've been very patient, but I crave your patience for a few minutes more. We're going to invite Mrs. Marcia Fraser Cummings to come to make some presentations. Mrs. Cummings is a member of the celebration committee, and we will try to do this as quickly as possible.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies, Ambassador, distinguished panel, Prof. Golden, Mrs. Shields, colleagues, patient audience, in this, the 60th year of our operations at the university and the 15th year of our celebration of excellence, it is my distinguished pleasure to present to our panelists a symbol of our gratitude to you, and the plaques read, "In recognition of your outstanding contribution to the celebration of excellence, College of Business and Management, University of Technology, 2018. I now ask Ambassador to come forward and receive this, and may you always remember that blue sky will be manifested."
I just wanted to say that blue is the color of European Union. And the European Union was 60 years old last year, so we're almost the same age.
Oh, great, great. Dr. Andre Gordon. Wonderful. Mr. Joseph Cox. my, my colleague, Mrs. Myrtle Ware.
Thank you, Mrs. Cummings. I'd also like to thank a few persons. The hardworking members of the organizing committee, Benny Watson, Chair. Claudia Ellis, Sharon Roach, the faculty administrator, Mrs. Cummings, Audrey Byfield from the School of Advanced Management, Errol Gregory, Audrey Hastings, Jackie Reed, Joan Lawler, Anthony Townsend. We thank you all for an outstanding job. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Joan Duncan Foundation, Quarries Auto, Fly Jamaica Airways, Port of Falmouth, Northwest Development, the RGR Gleaner Group, the Development Bank of Jamaica, NCB Foundation, Power Plus Electrical Plumbing and Hardware, and CPJ. You'll be happy to hear that this is the final thing I'll ask you to do, and that is to stand for the university song. No, just play it. Turn it. Turn it up.